The button had no label. That was the first thing Overseer Veilthon noticed when the human transmission ended. Not the words, not the silence that followed, not even the expression on the human's face in the final frame. It was the button. Matte black. Sitting on the edge of the console behind the human representative like something forgotten. Like something that had always been there. Like something that did not need a label because everyone in that room already knew what it did. Veilthon had reviewed the transmission 11 times. Every time, the button was there. Every time, no one looked at it. The Galactic Preservation Council had given humanity 48 of their hours. That was considered generous. Most species receiving a formal cessation demand, the legal instrument by which the Council required a civilization to surrender autonomy, dissolve its military architecture, and submit to administrative absorption, collapsed in negotiation within 6. The Drenethi had lasted 4 hours before their High Senate began weeping publicly. The Vorith Collective, despite controlling 17 systems, had surrendered in under 2 hours once the Council transmitted the first tactical assessment. Humanity had been given 48 hours. They used 47 of them in silence. No counterproposal. No negotiation team. No emergency broadcast to their population. According to every surveillance asset the Council had deployed across the Sol system, humanity's governments had not even formally convened. Their military satellites stayed in passive mode. Their communication channels showed ordinary traffic, weather data, entertainment signals, something their networks called sports scores. They don't understand what we've sent them, said Council Adjudicator Relsoma, studying the monitoring feeds from the 4th tier of the observation chamber. She was Kathrani, long-limbed, precise, used to civilizations that responded to legal instruments with legal instruments. They understand, said Veilthon. Then they are not taking it seriously. Or, Veilthon said slowly, they are taking it more seriously than we are. Relsoma looked at him. That distinction doesn't parse. He didn't answer. He was looking at the button again. On the 47th hour, humanity responded. Not with a transmission from a head of state. Not with a military posture shift. They sent one representative, a woman named Dr. Lena Vasquez, whose title, according to their records, was Special Coordinator for Existential Affairs. That office, the Council's Intelligence Division noted with some confusion, had been created 14 months ago. It had no previous staff. It had no listed mandate in any of humanity's publicly accessible governmental frameworks. It had apparently been created for exactly this moment. Vasquez appeared on screen wearing dark clothing with no insignia, sitting at a plain table. No flags. No ceremony. She looked directly into the transmission feed with the particular quality of stillness that Veilthon had learned, after 30 years of interspecies diplomacy, to distrust deeply. It was the stillness of someone who had already accepted something. I've been asked to speak on behalf of Earth, she said. Her voice was level. I want to be clear about one thing before anything else. We read your document, all of it. We had it translated 6 separate times to make sure we understood the exact terms. We do understand. She paused. We're not going to comply. Relsoma had actually laughed at that moment. Veilthon remembered it clearly. She had laughed the way someone laughs at an error so obvious it becomes briefly charming. On what basis? The Council's responding moderator had asked. Vasquez had tilted her head, barely a few degrees, the kind of movement so small it shouldn't register, and said, on the basis that we're not finished yet. Then the transmission had ended. And there, in the final frame, visible for less than 2 seconds before the feed cut, the button. The Council's military analysts delivered their assessment within the hour. It was, by any rational measurement, devastating. Humanity controlled 1 inhabited planet, 3 partially terraformed moons, and a scattering of deep space research stations. Their fastest vessels moved at roughly 0.3% of the Council's military cruiser speed. Their weapons technology sat approximately 6 generations behind the current standard. Their shielding was theoretical in several categories where the Council's was operational. The assessment concluded with a word Veilthon had never before seen in a formal military document: inexplicable. Not in reference to humanity's capabilities. In reference to humanity's response. They have no viable military option. The lead analyst, a Vorith named Cedrus, said during the briefing. They have no diplomatic leverage. They have no allies. Every civilization we've contacted has already declined to intervene. By any rational framework, refusal is not a strategy available to them. And yet, he pulled up the transmission's still frame. The button. What is that? Veilthon asked. We don't know, Cedrus said. We have no record of that console configuration in any of our architectural surveys of their facilities. The button does not appear in any documentation we've intercepted. We can't determine if it's connected to anything. Can you determine if it's real? The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. In Vorith culture, Veilthon knew. For seconds of silence from a military analyst meant the answer was something they didn't want to say aloud. No, Cedrus finally said. We cannot confirm it's connected to anything. We also cannot confirm it isn't. That was the first misinterpretation. The council concluded the button was theater. Psychological posturing. Humans, their behavioral analysts noted, had a long documented history of bluffing in high-stakes negotiation. They had an entire cultural tradition of games built around concealing the true value of one's position. The button was almost certainly part of that performance. A prop. A piece of designed uncertainty meant to introduce hesitation into council decision-making. The council decided to treat it as such and moved forward with Stage 2 of the cessation protocol, a limited demonstration of force. 47 council vessels repositioned to inside humanity's outer planetary boundary. Not an attack. A presence. A reminder that the gap between the council's power and humanity's resistance was not philosophical. It was physical, measurable, and closing. Vasquez reappeared on screen 12 minutes after the repositioning. She looked exactly the same. Same stillness. Same clothing. Same plane table. I see you've moved your ships, she said. We have, the moderator replied. I want to ask you something. She leaned forward, very slightly. Have you ever studied trench warfare? The moderator paused. We are familiar with historical human conflict, yes. Then you know, Vasquez said, that the losing side kept fighting for 4 years after it became mathematically obvious they couldn't win. Not because they thought they could win. Because the other option was surrender. She let that land. We're not making a military calculation. We're making a human one. Those are not the same thing. The transmission ended. Behind her, in the final frame, the button was gone. The console was empty. Veilthon replayed that final frame 43 times over the next 6 hours. He was aware this was not entirely rational behavior. He was aware that the disappearance of the button could have 100 mundane explanations. The angle had changed, something had been moved, the frame was simply too brief to confirm anything. He was aware of all of that. He could not stop watching. You're concerned, Relsoma said, finding him in the observation chamber at the 4th hour of his vigil. I'm trying to understand what she meant by, not finished yet, he said. It was rhetoric. Everything she said has been rhetoric, he agreed. Except none of it has felt empty. He turned from the screen. What is humanity currently doing, right now, in the Sol system? Relsoma pulled the monitoring summary. She read it. She read it again. Nothing unusual, she said. Some elevated activity at 3 of their research installations. Increased power consumption at 2 orbital platforms. Their northern hemisphere is having what their networks are calling an unusually strong aurora event. Veilthon stood very still. What causes an aurora? He asked quietly. Particle interactions with a magnetic. Relsoma stopped. She stopped completely. Their magnetic field, she said, is fluctuating. Veilthon finished. Not naturally. The Council's Science Division confirmed it within the hour. Earth's magnetosphere was experiencing deliberate, controlled fluctuations, not large enough to cause planetary damage, but far beyond anything their publicly known technology should have been capable of producing. The fluctuations were patterned, not random, structured, in a way that the science teams were still working to decode. They're transmitting something, Cedrus said. The military analyst had not slept. Veilthon could see it. Through their own magnetic field. We're trying to determine the target. The target isn't here, Veilthon said. Everyone looked at him. If they were transmitting to us, they'd have sent us a message. They're transmitting to someone else. He looked at the feed from the Sol system. 47 Council warships hanging in the dark between Mars and the asteroid belt. Each one capable of reducing a continent to glass in under 6 minutes. The question is who? No one answered because no one knew. That was the moment Veilthon understood they had been wrong about something fundamental. Not about humanity's military capability. About humanity's preparation window. 14 months ago, the same month the Office of Existential Affairs had been created, the same month Vasquez had apparently been appointed to a role that had never previously existed, humanity's deep space monitoring networks had gone offline for a scheduled upgrade lasting 11 days. 11 days during which no one had been watching what humanity was sending into the dark. The revelation didn't arrive as a dramatic announcement. It arrived as a footnote in an intelligence report flagged by a junior analyst who almost hadn't mentioned it, who had almost categorized it as background noise. 17 months ago, a human deep space relay had detected a response signal from a source approximately 340 light-years from Sol. Not from any Council installation. Not from any cataloged civilization. From a region the Council's own charts listed as uninhabited deep space. The signal had lasted 4 minutes. Humanity had never publicly acknowledged it. Their government records showed no discussion of it in any intercepted communication, which was, Veilthon knew, exactly what a government that had discussed it in uninterceptable communication would look like. They've been talking to something, he said. We don't know that, Relsoma said, but her voice had changed. The certainty was gone. The signal could have been. Natural phenomena don't respond to specific frequencies at precisely the angular position of an outgoing human transmission, Chu Cedrus said flatly. He looked like a man who had just watched his own tactical assessment become worthless. Something answered them. Veilthon sat down. For the first time in 30 years of interspecies diplomacy, he sat down in the middle of a crisis briefing because his legs had made a decision his mind hadn't authorized yet. The button, he said quietly. Everyone looked at him. It wasn't a prop, he said. It wasn't theater. They showed it to us deliberately. They wanted us to wonder what it did. His voice was very steady now, with the particular steadiness of someone walking carefully across ice. They've been in contact with something for 17 months. They created the Existential Affairs Office to manage First Contact Protocol, not our contact. Someone else's. And they sat in silence for 47 hours not because they didn't know how to respond to us. He looked at the screen, at the empty console where the button had been. They were waiting for a confirmation. Relsoma's first instinct was to call it speculation, to demand more evidence, to run another analysis. She didn't, because the magnetosphere fluctuations had stopped 6 minutes ago, and in the same 6 minutes, every Council ship in the Sol system had simultaneously reported the same anomaly. Their long-range scanners were registering something approaching from the 340 light-year bearing, moving at a speed that was not possible under any physics the Council had formally catalogued. 43 ships. 43 identical reports. Get Vasquez, Veilthon said. She appeared on screen within 90 seconds, which told him she had been waiting. You pressed it, he said. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. Yes. What's coming? For the first time, something moved in her expression. Not triumph. Not relief. Something that looked disturbingly like grief. Friends, she said, that we've never met in person, but that we've been talking to for 17 months, and who have been watching us for considerably longer than that. They're allies. There, she stopped, chose her words with a care that made Veilthon's chest tighten. They're beings who understand what it means to be told you're not allowed to exist on your own terms. They've met the Council before. About 400 years ago. The Council chamber went utterly silent. 400 years ago. The Yet-Hari conflict. The civilization the Council's records listed as dissolved, peacefully dissolved, administratively absorbed, a cultural footnote in the cessation protocol archives. The civilization that had supposedly accepted the administrative absorption willingly. They didn't dissolve, Veilthon said. Not a question. They went dark, Vasquez said. There's a difference. One of them is chosen. They've been building and waiting, and they needed someone to press a specific button from a specific location at a specific time. She looked directly at him. We were happy to help. Why would they trust you? You've known them 17 months. Something shifted in Vasquez's face. The grief sharpened. Because we told them the truth about what the council sent us, and asked them what they wished someone had done for them 400 years ago. They told us. We did exactly that. And what did you sacrifice for this? She was quiet for 3 full seconds. We pressed the button, she said, before we knew for certain what would come through. We pressed it on faith, which is a very human thing to do. A breath. If it had gone wrong, your 47 ships would have watched us burn and called it a cautionary tale. We knew that. You accepted that. We accepted it, she said, because the alternative was your document. And we're not finished yet. What emerged from the 340 light-year bearing was not a fleet. That was the second-to-last misinterpretation the Council would make about humanity. It was one ship, vast, larger than anything the Council's current engineering could produce, but one ship, moving without aggression, transmitting on open frequencies in a language that was not in any Council archive but which 3 of their linguists reported feeling, in ways they could not professionally justify, that they almost understood. The Yet-Hari, because that was what they were, for 100 years older and very much not dissolved, did not attack. They broadcast a single document. It took 6 minutes to receive in full. It was a legal instrument, meticulously, breathtakingly constructed in every known galactic legal framework. It was a counter-cessation demand, addressed to the Council, from a civilization that had, apparently, spent 400 years preparing it. Chu Cedrus read the summary and sat down. They have legal standing, he said, his voice barely functional. Under the Council's own foundational charter, Article 7, Clause 19, which we wrote, which we have enforced, a formerly absorbed civilization that can demonstrate non-consensual dissolution retains the right to petition for re-autonomy with full remediation. He looked up. We absorbed them without consent. We've been maintaining a fiction in our own records. If this document is valid, is it valid? Relsoma asked. Silence. Yes, said the Council's own legal division 40 minutes later, in the most expensive word Veilthon had ever heard spoken aloud. The Council convened in emergency session. Veilthon sat through 9 hours of argument, of anger, of 5 separate proposals that all reduced to the same thing. Find a way to make this not matter. Find a procedural mechanism. Find something the Yet-Hari document had missed. There was nothing. The document was perfect. 400 years of perfect. At the end of the 9th hour, Veilthon asked to speak. We made an error, he said, that humanity understood before we did. We treated cessation as a tool of order. They treated it as what it actually is, violence wearing legal clothing. They looked at our document and recognized it immediately because humans have a history of recognizing that specific disguise. He looked around the chamber. They didn't press that button to threaten us. They pressed it to give the Yet-Hari their voice back. That was the entire plan. Not a military victory. A legal one. Built on 17 months of conversation and 400 years of someone else's preparation. He paused. We brought 47 warships to intimidate one planet. They answered with a document that may restructure this entire council. He let that land. We underestimated them because they looked weak. We never asked why they weren't afraid. The cessation demand against Earth was withdrawn. Formally. Procedurally. In the language the Council used so that things became invisible. Vasquez appeared on screen one final time. No plane table this time. She was standing, and behind her, visible through a wide viewport, the lights of Earth were visible in the dark. We want to be clear, she said. We're not your enemies. We never were. But we are finished accepting documents that tell us to stop. The pause. The Yet-Hari have been alone for a long time. They could use some company. The feed ended. The viewport. The lights. No button. Because the button had already done what it needed to do. Veilthon filed his personal assessment 3 days later. It was not a political document. It was not a tactical analysis. It was the record of a realization, Submitted because he believed the council needed to understand something that no intelligence report would ever quite capture. He wrote, "We assumed their silence was confusion. It was preparation. We assumed their refusal was arrogance. It was calculation. We assumed the button was theater. It was trust. Trust extended to beings they had never met, across distances we considered empty, on the possibility that the right action done at the right moment by the right species could change something that had been broken for 400 years. They were afraid. I want to be clear about that. Every behavioral indicator we had confirmed they were genuinely afraid. They pressed the button anyway. We have cataloged thousands of species across this galaxy. We have measured courage in all of them. The courage of strength, the courage of certainty, the courage of calculated odds. We have never, until now, had a word for the courage of beings who press a button into the dark not knowing what answers. We need one. They have had one for as long as they've had language. They call it hope. I have spent 30 years in interspecies diplomacy. I have never been afraid of a civilization before. I am afraid now. Not because they are strong. Because they are the only species in this galaxy willing to be afraid, acknowledge it completely, and act anyway, not in spite of the fear, but directly through it, as if the fear itself were the proof that the action mattered. Every rational civilization in this galaxy stops when the cost becomes real. Humans look at the cost and press the button harder. The galaxy has not yet understood what that means. I suspect it will.